The story of Sudan, a land of immense history and enduring struggle, begins in the deep past, nourished by the lifeblood of the Nile River. For tens of thousands of years, long before recorded history, early humans thrived in this region. The Nile, with its predictable, annual floods, created a fertile, green ribbon of land cutting through the vast desert. This offered a sanctuary for hunter-gatherer communities, who followed the rhythm of the seasons. They hunted wild animals in the surrounding savannas and fished in the river's rich waters, leaving behind rock art and stone tools that, whisper of their ancient existence and their profound connection to this powerful river, which shaped not just the landscape, but the destiny of all who lived beside it. As the millennia passed, these nomadic groups began to settle down, marking a monumental shift in human history. Around 10,000 BCE, during the Neolithic era, the people of the Nile Valley started to experiment with agriculture and animal domestication. They learned to plant grains like sorghum and millet and to herd cattle, transforming their societies from wandering bands into settled communities. This agricultural revolution allowed for larger populations, the development of more complex social structures, and the establishment of permanent villages. The Nile was the central force in this transformation, its waters irrigating their crops, and its mud providing the material for their homes, laying the very first bricks of civilization in this ancient land. This new, settled way of life gave rise to one of Africa's earliest and most impressive urban civilizations, the Kerma culture, which emerged around 2500 BCE. Centered on the city of Kerma in modern-day northern Sudan, this civilization grew into a powerful and sophisticated kingdom. It was a major trading hub, connecting the heart of Africa with pharaonic Egypt to the north. Archaeologists have uncovered a sprawling city with remarkable structures, including a massive mud brick temple known as the Western Defufa. The craftsmanship of Kerma's potters was honestly exquisite, producing pottery so fine and thin it is often compared to eggshells. Kerma was not a mere offshoot of Egypt, it was a distinct and formidable African power in its own right. The legacy of these early inhabitants is foundational to understanding Sudan, their ability to harness the resources of the Nile, their transition to settled life, and the birth of the Kerma kingdom established a pattern of civilization building that would echo through the ages. This era demonstrates that Sudan was never a peripheral region but a center of innovation, culture, and power long before many other parts of the world. The deep-rooted traditions of community, agriculture, and trade that began in this prehistoric dawn would continue to define the identity and the course of the diverse peoples who would later call this land home, setting the stage for the rise of even greater kingdoms to come. Following the decline of the Kerma civilization, a new and even more formidable power rose from the Nubian sands, the Kingdom of Kush. With its capital first at Napata and later at the great city of Meroe, Kush became a dominant force in the Nile Valley for over 1,000 years, beginning around 1000 BCE. The Kushite kings saw themselves as the true heirs to the traditions of the Egyptian pharaohs, adopting many aspects of Egyptian religion, culture, and royal customs. They worshipped Egyptian gods like Amun and built magnificent temples in their honor. This cultural fusion created a unique and powerful identity, one that would eventually see Kushite rulers achieve the unimaginable control over Egypt itself. The zenith of Kushite power arrived in the 8th century BCE when the great king Paye led his armies north, conquering Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty. For a time, these black pharaohs, as they came to be known, ruled a vast empire stretching from the Mediterranean Sea deep into what is now Sudan. They were not foreign invaders but saw themselves as restorers of traditional Egyptian values, which they believed had been corrupted. Rulers like Paye and his successors, such as Taharqa, oversaw a period of renaissance, building and restoring temples and monuments throughout Egypt and Nubia. Their reign is a powerful testament to the strength and ambition of this southern kingdom. After being pushed out of Egypt by Assyrian invaders, the Kushite kingdom did not fade away. Instead, it recentered its power further south at the city of Meroe. This move marked the beginning of the Meroitic period, a golden age of Kushite culture. Here, the kingdom developed its own unique script, a system of writing that remains only partially deciphered to this day. Meroe became a thriving center of iron production, its furnaces burning day and night, earning it the nickname the Birmingham of Africa. The wealth generated from iron, gold, and trade allowed its rulers to construct hundreds of distinctive, steep-sided pyramids as tombs. More than were ever built in Egypt itself, which still dot the desert landscape as a silent reminder of their glory. Ultimately, the Kingdom of Kush began a slow decline, weakened by environmental changes, shifting trade routes that bypassed the Nile, and the rise of a new power to the east, the Aksumite Empire in modern-day Ethiopia. Around 350 CE, an Aksumite army sacked Meroe, bringing the thousand-year-old kingdom to a final, dramatic end. Yet, the legacy of Kush endured. It had forged a powerful identity for the people of Nubia, established a tradition of statecraft and kingship, and left behind a stunning archaeological record of its achievements. The memory of the Black Pharaohs and the pyramids of Meroe continues to inspire a sense of pride and a deep connection to a majestic past. With the collapse of the Meroitic kingdom, the Nile Valley in Nubia entered a period of transformation. The old gods of Kush and Egypt gave way to a new religion spreading from the Mediterranean Christianity. By the 6th century CE, missionaries had successfully converted the rulers of the region, leading to the emergence of 3 distinct and vibrant Christian kingdoms: Media Group, reenactment of early Christian missionaries in Nubia, ancient church ruins in Sudan. Stock, distribute. Equally Nobadia in the north, with its capital at Faras, Makuria in the center, the most powerful of the 3, with its capital at Old Dongola, and Alodia in the south, centered around the city of Soba, near modern-day Khartoum. These kingdoms formed a strong Christian bulwark that would last for nearly 1,000 years. Life in the Christian Nubian kingdoms was characterized by a unique blend of local traditions and Christian faith. Churches and cathedrals were built often adorned with magnificent frescoes depicting biblical scenes, saints, and dark-skinned Nubian kings and bishops. These paintings, preserved for centuries by the dry desert climate, reveal a rich artistic culture and a deep devotion to their new faith. The kingdoms developed a distinct liturgy and used the Nubian language, written in a script adapted from the Greek alphabet, for religious and administrative purposes. Makuria, in particular, was renowned for its military prowess, strong centralized government, and its success in holding back the tide of Arab Islamic expansion from the north for centuries. One of the most defining moments for Christian Nubia came in the 7th century, following the Arab conquest of Egypt. When Arab armies pushed south, they were met with fierce resistance from the skilled archers of Makuria. The formidable Nubian defense led to a stalemate, resulting in a unique treaty known as the Baki. This agreement, signed in 652 CE, established peace between Christian Nubia and Muslim Egypt for over 600 years. It was not a treaty of submission, but one of mutual respect, regulating trade and movement between the two realms. This long peace allowed the Christian kingdoms to flourish, fostering a period of stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement that was unique in the region. The eventual decline of the Christian kingdoms was a slow and gradual process, not a sudden conquest. Over centuries, the influence of Islam grew through trade, intermarriage, and the steady migration of Arab tribes into the region. The central authority of the Nubian kings weakened, and internal divisions made them vulnerable. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the kingdom of Makuria had fragmented, and the southernmost kingdom of Alodia eventually fell. While the Christian faith lingered in some communities for a time, the political structures that supported it had dissolved, paving the way for a new chapter in Sudan's history, one that would be defined by the growing dominance of Islam. As the Christian kingdoms of Nubia waned, the religious and cultural landscape of Sudan underwent a profound transformation. The spread of Islam was less a story of military conquest and more one of gradual absorption and cultural fusion. Arab traders and nomadic groups had been migrating into the region for centuries, bringing their faith and customs with them. They intermarried with the local Nubian, Beja, and other African populations, creating a new blended Arab-African identity, particularly in the northern and central parts of the country. A pivotal role in this process was played by Sufi missionaries, or holy men, who traveled through the land establishing schools and religious brotherhoods, teaching a form of Islam that was often syncretic and easily integrated with local customs and beliefs. This cultural and religious shift culminated in the rise of a new major power in the 16th century, the Fungi Sultanate, also known as the Black Sultanate. Its origins are debated, but it was established by a coalition of Fungi leaders from the south and Arab groups, who together conquered the remnants of the kingdom of Alodia. They established their capital at Sennar, on the Blue Nile, and from there, they built a powerful state that would dominate a large swath of Sudan for over 300 years. The Fungi Sultanate officially adopted Islam as the state religion, solidifying its role as the dominant faith and creating a political and cultural center that would define the identity of central Sudan for generations. Under the Fungi rulers, the Sultanate became a hub of Islamic scholarship, trade, and culture. The capital, Sennar, grew into a bustling city, attracting scholars, merchants, and mystics from across the Islamic world. The Fungi court patronized religious learning, and a class of learned men, known as the ulama, became influential advisors to the sultans. The state's economy was built on agriculture along the Nile, and control of lucrative trade routes that funneled gold, ivory, and slaves from the interior of Africa northward to Egypt and the Red Sea. This wealth allowed the sultans to maintain a strong army and a complex administration, ensuring their authority over a diverse and sprawling territory. However, by the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Fungi Sultanate began to suffer from internal decay. Power struggles between the royal family and rival factions of the court, coupled with rebellions in the provinces, severely weakened the central government. The sultans became mere figureheads, their authority eroded and their kingdom fragmented. This internal weakness left the once mighty sultanate vulnerable to outside forces. When a new, modern, and ambitious power emerged in Egypt led by Muhammad Ali, the fractured Fungi state was in no position to resist. Its decline and eventual collapse in the 1820s would usher in a new and disruptive era of foreign domination. In 1821, the history of Sudan was, violently rerouted by the ambitions of Muhammad Ali, the Ottoman governor of Egypt. Seeking to modernize his army and expand his empire, he sent his forces south to conquer the lands of the Nile. The fragmented and weakened Fungi Sultanate offered little resistance, and the Turco-Egyptian forces quickly established control over large parts of the country. They founded the city of Khartoum at the confluence of the Blue and White Niles, making it their new administrative capital. This period, known as the Turkiya, was, honestly, marked by brutal exploitation. The new rulers were primarily interested in extracting Sudan's resources: gold, ivory, and, most devastatingly, people who were captured and enslaved to serve in Muhammad Ali's armies. The Turco-Egyptian administration was harsh and deeply resented by the Sudanese people. Heavy taxes were imposed, and the government's authority was often enforced, with extreme violence. The slave trade expanded dramatically, causing immense suffering and, depopulating entire regions. This foreign rule, perceived as both oppressive and corrupt, provoked widespread anger and a yearning for liberation. Dissatisfaction simmered across the country, creating fertile ground for a leader who could unite the disparate groups against their common enemy. The stage was set for a massive religious and political uprising that would engulf the entire nation in a holy war. That leader emerged in 1881 in the person of Muhammad Ahmad, a charismatic Sufi religious figure. He declared himself the Mahdi, the divinely guided one foretold in Islamic tradition, who would restore the purity of the faith and free the land from its unjust rulers. His call for jihad resonated powerfully with a population suffering under foreign oppression. People from all walks of life, dispossessed farmers, nomadic warriors, and disillusioned religious leaders, flocked to his banner. His followers, known as the Ansar, were fueled by fervent religious belief and a desire for independence. They achieved a series of stunning military victories against the better-equipped but demoralized Turco-Egyptian forces. The Mahdist revolt reached its climax in January 1885 with the capture of Khartoum. After a long siege, the Mahdist forces stormed the city, overwhelming its defenses and killing the British general Charles Gordon, who had been sent to oversee the Egyptian evacuation. The fall of Khartoum was a spectacular victory that sent shockwaves across the world. The Mahdi established a new capital across the river at Omdurman and created the first state to rule over nearly all of modern Sudan. Though the Mahdi himself died just a few months later, his successor, the Khalifa Abdullahi, consolidated the Mahdist state, which would rule for another 13 years. It was a brief but transformative period of independence, forging a powerful sense of national identity rooted in resistance and Islamic revival. The independent Mahdist state was viewed as a threat to British imperial interests in the region, particularly the security of Egypt and the Suez Canal. Determined to crush the state and avenge the death of General Gordon, Britain launched a systematic and technologically superior military campaign. In 1898, an Anglo-Egyptian army, equipped with modern artillery and Maxim guns, confronted the Mahdist forces at the Battle of Omdurman. The result was a devastatingly one-sided slaughter with tens of thousands of Ansar warriors killed. The defeat marked the end of the Mahdist state and the beginning of a new period of foreign rule, this time under a unique arrangement known as the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium. In theory, the Condominium, established in 1899, meant that Sudan was to be ruled jointly by Britain and Egypt. In reality, Britain held all the power, and British officials made all the key decisions. The country was effectively a British colony. The colonial administration focused on establishing law and order, building basic infrastructure like railways and telegraph lines, and expanding the production of cotton in the Gezira scheme to supply British textile mills. However, their policies were also deeply divisive. They governed the Arab-Muslim North and the largely African, Christian, and animist South as two separate territories, restricting movement and communication between them. This southern policy deliberately exacerbated a divide that would have catastrophic consequences later. Despite the imposition of colonial authority, the spirit of resistance that had fueled the Mahdist revolt did not die. Throughout the early 20th century, there were numerous local uprisings and protests against British rule. As a new Western-educated Sudanese elite began to emerge, this resistance evolved into organized nationalist movements. Groups like the Graduates General Congress, initially formed as an alumni association, began to make political demands and advocate for self-determination. They drew inspiration from both the legacy of the Mahdist struggle and the global currents of anti-colonial thought, gradually building a movement that called for an end to foreign domination. The path to independence accelerated after World War II, as the British Empire began to unravel, and Egypt, under a new revolutionary government, also pushed for the withdrawal of British troops from the Nile Valley. The nationalist movements in Sudan skillfully navigated the competing interests of Britain and Egypt. After years of negotiations and political maneuvering, the demand for self-rule became irresistible. On January 1, 1956, the Sudanese flag was raised over the presidential palace in Khartoum, and Sudan became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence from colonial rule. It was a moment of immense hope and pride, but the new nation was born with deep-seated internal divisions that had been entrenched and worsened during the colonial era. Sudan's independence in 1956 was celebrated with great optimism, but the new nation was deeply fractured from its very birth. The colonial-era Southern policy had created two Sudans in one, a politically and economically dominant Arab-Muslim North and a marginalized, underdeveloped South inhabited by diverse African ethnic groups who largely practiced Christianity or traditional animist beliefs. Southern leaders feared that independence would simply mean trading British colonial masters for Arab ones from Khartoum. Their demands for a federal system and greater autonomy were ignored by the northern-dominated government, which instead pursued policies of Arabization and Islamization, further alienating the South. These tensions erupted into armed conflict even before official independence. The First Sudanese Civil War began in 1955, when a group of Southern soldiers mutinied, sparking a guerrilla war that would last for 17 long years. The conflict, led by the Anyanya rebel movement, was a brutal and destructive struggle that caused hundreds of thousands of deaths and displaced countless more. It was a war fought over identity, resources, religion, and power. The fighting finally came to an end in 1972 with the signing of the Addis Ababa Agreement, which granted the South a significant degree of regional autonomy. For a decade, it seemed that peace was possible and the nation could finally begin to heal its wounds. This fragile peace was shattered in 1983. The central government in Khartoum, then under President Jafar Nimeri, unilaterally dismantled the Southern Autonomy Agreement and declared the imposition of Islamic Sharia law across the entire country, including the non-Muslim South. This was seen as the ultimate betrayal and act of oppression. In response, Southern soldiers, led by the charismatic Colonel John Garang, formed the Sudan People's Liberation Army, and the Second Sudanese Civil War began. This war was even more devastating than the first, lasting for 22 years, and, becoming one of the longest and deadliest conflicts of the 20th century. The Second Sudanese Civil War caused unimaginable suffering. It is estimated that over 2 million people were killed, mostly civilians, from fighting, famine, and disease, while another 4 million were forced from their homes. The SPLA, under John Garang, fought not for separation, but for a new Sudan, a secular, democratic, and united country where all cultures and religions would be treated equally. However, the war became a brutal stalemate, fueled by oil discoveries in the south which raised the stakes for both sides. The immense human cost and the unending nature of the conflict eventually forced both the government and the rebels to the negotiating table, leading to a landmark peace agreement in 2005. While the devastating civil war between North and South raged, another conflict was brewing in Sudan's vast western region of Darfur. For years, tensions had been simmering between the region's settled African farming communities, such as the Fur, Masalit, and Zagawa, and nomadic Arab pastoralist groups. These tensions were rooted in disputes over scarce land and water resources, but they were inflamed by decades of political and economic marginalization of the region by the central government in Khartoum. The government was accused of favoring Arab tribes and arming them, further upsetting the delicate balance of power in the region and laying the groundwork for a catastrophic explosion of violence. In 2003, 2 rebel groups from Darfur's non-Arab communities launched an uprising, accusing the government of Omar al-Bashir of oppressing them. The government's response was swift and horrifically brutal. It unleashed a proxy militia force, infamously known as the Janjaweed, a term meaning devils on horseback. Supported by government aircraft, the Janjaweed swept through Darfur, carrying out a scorched earth campaign. They systematically attacked villages, murdering men, raping women, and burning homes and crops to the ground. The violence was clearly ethnic in nature, a campaign of terror designed to crush the rebellion by destroying the civilian populations, from which the rebels drew support, leading to international accusations of ethnic cleansing and genocide. As the horror in Darfur unfolded, the long-running North-South Civil War was finally drawing to a close. In 2005, the government and the SPLA signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. This historic accord ended the Second Sudanese Civil War and, crucially, granted the South the right to hold a referendum on independence after a 6-year interim period. The agreement created a power-sharing government and set a timeline for a final resolution to the question of national unity. John Garang, the SPLA leader, became vice president of Sudan, but his tragic death in a helicopter crash just weeks later was a major blow to the vision of a new Sudan. His successor, Salva Kiir, would instead steer the South towards full separation. In January 2011, the people of southern Sudan voted in their long-awaited referendum. The result was overwhelming. Nearly 99% voted to secede from the North. On July 9, 2011, the Republic of South Sudan was born, becoming the world's newest nation. Crowds in the capital, Juba, celebrated with joyous abandon, marking the end of a long and bloody struggle for self-determination. However, this historic moment of separation did not bring peace to the region. Key issues like border demarcation and the sharing of oil revenues were left unresolved, creating new sources of conflict between the two Sudans. And for Sudan itself, the loss of 3/4 of its oil reserves was a devastating economic blow, contributing to the instability that would soon consume the nation once again. Following the secession of South Sudan, Sudan, under the iron-fisted rule of Omar al-Bashir, spiraled into economic crisis and continued political repression. Decades of grievances finally boiled over in December 2018, when protests, sparked by rising bread prices, erupted and quickly morphed into a nationwide pro-democracy revolution. For months, millions of Sudanese, led by women and young people, courageously took to the streets, demanding an end to Bashir's 30-year dictatorship. In April 2019, the military, seeing the writing on the wall, stepped in and overthrew Bashir. However, the revolutionaries' hopes for a swift transition to civilian rule were dashed as the generals who removed Bashir, including Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of the Sudanese Armed Forces and his deputy, Mohamed Hamdan Hemeti Dagalo of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, clung to power. A tense power-sharing arrangement between the military and civilian leaders followed, but it was fraught with distrust. The two generals, Burhan and Hemeti, had been allies in the coup, but they were ultimately rivals, each commanding a powerful armed force and harboring their own ambitions for ultimate control. The RSF, which had evolved from the notorious Janjaweed militia, had grown into a massive private army with control over gold mines and powerful foreign backers. The breaking point came in April 2023, as a plan to integrate the RSF into the regular army collapsed. On April 15th, fighting exploded in Khartoum between the SAF and the RSF, plunging the country into a new and catastrophic civil war. The conflict has been an unmitigated disaster for Sudan. The war, a brutal power struggle between two generals, has shattered the country, turning the capital and other cities into battlefields. To date, over 150,000 people have been killed. The RSF, employing the same brutal tactics as their Janjaweed predecessors, have been accused of widespread war crimes, including mass killings, systematic sexual violence, and a new wave of genocidal atrocities against non-Arab groups in Darfur. The SAF, in turn, has been condemned for its indiscriminate aerial bombardments of civilian areas. The fighting has destroyed over 70% of the country's hospitals and completely collapsed the economy, pushing the nation to the brink of total failure. Today, on November 16, 2025, Sudan is enduring the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Over 12 million people have been driven from their homes, creating a displacement crisis of staggering proportions. The nation is in the grip of a catastrophic famine, with over 635,000 people experiencing full-blown famine conditions, more than the rest of the world combined. Both sides, particularly the RSF, are accused of using hunger as a weapon of war by blocking aid deliveries. Despite the scale of the horror, the international response has been shamefully inadequate. Sudan's tumultuous journey, from the splendors of Kush to the hopes of revolution, has now led to this dark chapter. The country's past of deep-seated division, military dominance, and resource exploitation has converged into a perfect storm, leaving its future hanging by the thinnest of threads.